Hello everyone, welcome back. This is a story from her silent revenge, and it has taken a turn you absolutely didn't expect. Let's begin.
After my husband's funeral, I tried to attend my sister's birthday party. It was a huge mistake. Margaret stood before everyone and announced, "Daniel signed this agreement promising to pay me $325,000, half Claire's house, over 5 years to care for our dying parents." She held up the paper like a trophy. I said, "I understand," trying to suppress a laugh. But the worst part, that's what I was about to discover, what she had done to our parents during those 5 years. I truly appreciate you being here. Before we begin, help me out, comment below, and tell me where you're watching from. Are you listening during your commute or at home? I'd love to know. Quick note, this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental, but I'm confident the message it carries will genuinely benefit you. After my husband's funeral, I attended my sister's 48th birthday party. In front of everyone, she announced that Daniel had promised her $325,000, half the value of my home. She even had a signed agreement to prove it. I said, "I see," and tried to hold back my laughter, because there was something Margaret didn't know. My name is Claire Mitchell, and at 38 years old, I never expected to become a widow. 1 week ago, I lost Daniel, my husband of 9 years, to a sudden brain aneurysm. Just 7 days after his funeral, I dragged myself to my older sister Margaret's birthday celebration, where she tried to destroy me in front of a room full of witnesses. What she didn't know was why I could barely keep a straight face. The invitation had arrived 4 days after Daniel's funeral. My mother called that morning, her voice carrying that southern tone that meant refusal wasn't an option. "Claire, honey, I know you're grieving, but Margaret would be so hurt if you didn't come. You know how she sacrificed for your daddy and me. I should have said no. I should have stayed home in my Victorian house on Bull Street in Savannah, surrounded by Daniel's things and the silence that had become my companion." But guilt is powerful in Southern families where propriety matters as much as truth. So that Saturday afternoon, March 8th, 2024, I drove to Margaret's rental house across town. The contrast between our neighborhoods told its own story. My historic home in Ardsley Park had wraparound porches and heart pine floors Daniel and I had restored together. Margaret's vinyl-sided rental sat behind chain-link fences in a neighborhood where prosperity had long since moved on. I'd wrapped an expensive cashmere scarf that morning. The irony wasn't lost on me bringing a gift to someone who would soon demand $350,000. Linda Pierce opened the door before I could knock. Margaret's high school friend with bleached blonde hair and too much makeup, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Oh, Claire, you made it. Margaret will be so pleased." That hesitation should have warned me. The living room was decorated with blue balloons and a happy 48th birthday banner. About 20 people milled around, neighbors, co-workers, and Gary, Margaret's husband, standing in the corner like he wanted to disappear. When he saw me, his face went pale. Conversation stopped as I entered. Heads turned. The energy shifted not with sympathy for the newly widowed, but with something else. Anticipation. Like spectators waiting for a car crash. I felt it then, that awareness of walking into a trap. But what could I do? Southern women don't make scenes. We smile through discomfort and handle problems behind closed doors. So I smiled. I accepted condolences. I set my gift beside cheaper offerings. I took the sweet tea I wouldn't drink. Margaret made her entrance 15 minutes later with theatrical timing. She wore a new dress I'd seen in a boutique window, easily $200, with fresh highlights in her hair. For someone drowning in debt, she certainly dressed the part of prosperity. "Claire, I'm so glad you came." She hugged me for the audience, and up close I saw the calculation in her eyes, the excitement that had nothing to do with birthday cake. "I need to tell everyone something," Margaret announced, tapping her glass. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming. After these past years, I'm grateful to be here." Sympathetic murmurs rippled through the crowd about her caregiving sacrifice. As you know, I gave up 5 years to care for my dying parents. 5 years of bathing them, feeding them, managing medications. I did it because it was right. My stomach clenched. My sister Claire was very busy during that time. Her voice sharpened. building her career, living in her beautiful house, traveling with her wonderful husband. The burden fell entirely on Gary and me. People shifted uncomfortably. Before Daniel passed, her voice caught perfectly. We had a conversation. He knew what I'd sacrificed. He knew Claire's inheritance helped buy that house, and he wanted to make things right. She pulled out a folded document. Daniel signed this agreement promising fair compensation for my caregiving. We agreed that meant at least half the house's value, $325,000. Gasps filled the room. Margaret held up the paper triumphantly. I didn't want to bring this up so soon. I wanted to give Claire time to grieve, but I'm facing eviction. Claire Honey Daniel wanted this. He wanted to take care of me the way I took care of our parents. Every eye turned to me. I stood there and felt something close to amusement, because I recognized that signature from across the room. I'd seen Daniel's signature thousands of times on cards, documents our house deed. I'd watched him perfect it in law school, that distinctive connecting stroke between letters. That signature was wrong. Close but wrong. Margaret had forged it. May I see it? My voice was remarkably calm. Margaret's confidence flickered before she handed it over. I unfolded it slowly, aware of everyone watching. The legal language was amateurish, cobbled from internet templates. The notary stamp was missing. The date claimed December, when Daniel and I had been in Charleston for our anniversary. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what I knew that Margaret didn't. The preparations Daniel and I had made for exactly this scenario. I refolded it and handed it back. Thank you for sharing this, Margaret. We should discuss this privately. This is a family matter. Her disappointment was almost comical. She'd expected tears, anger, collapse. She'd staged this for maximum impact, and I was refusing my assigned role. Everyone here deserves to know the truth, Margaret insisted. I understand, I said, and I did. I understood she'd just committed fraud before 20 witnesses. I understood she'd timed this for my most vulnerable moment. I understood she'd counted on grief making me weak. What she didn't understand was that Daniel had seen her coming. I need to go. I set down my tea. Margaret, we'll talk later. I walked out with my head high, feeling shocked stares follow me. I made it to my car before the laughter escaped, not joy, but relief, mixed with rage and vindication. Margaret thought she'd caught me defenseless. She thought that forged document would intimidate me into surrender. She had no idea. Daniel and I had prepared, not for his death, but for the possibility that Margaret's jealousy might cross a line. We'd talked to lawyers. We'd kept records. We'd stored documents she didn't know existed. I fought back inappropriate laughter, because there was something else Margaret didn't know, something that made her scheme not just cruel, but impossible. And soon she would find out. I pulled away, watching her house disappear in my mirror. Daniel had protected me even in death. Now it was time to protect his memory and show my sister what happened when you tried to destroy someone who'd already survived their worst day. Margaret thought she was 3 steps ahead. She had no idea I was already at the finish line. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why Margaret's accusation didn't destroy me the way she intended, you need to know about Daniel and the life we built together. We met 10 years ago at a charity auction benefiting Savannah Children's Hospital. I was 28, volunteering while trying to launch my interior design business. The event was held at the Telfair Museum, all soaring ceilings and soft lighting that made the artwork glow. I kept circling back to the same piece, a watercolor of River Street at sunset, golden light spilling across cobblestones, the Savannah River catching fire in amber and rose. Something about it felt like home, like every beautiful thing about this city captured in one frame. The bidding closed at 9. At 8:55, I stood in front of that painting, fingers hovering over the bid sheet, doing mental math that wouldn't work. My startup budget had no room for $300 art, no matter how much my heart wanted it. It's beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find a man beside me, tall dark hair silvering at the temples, blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He wore a suit that fit too well to be off the rack. It's perfect, I said, then felt foolish. The artist really captured the light. The way it makes everything look possible, he said. And something shifted in my chest, because yes, that was exactly it. He picked up the pen and wrote a number that made my bid look like pocket change. Then he walked away without another glance. I should have been disappointed. Instead, I watched him move through the crowd, gracious with everyone, the kind of person who thanked catering staff by name. After the auction closed, someone tapped my shoulder. The same man stood there holding the watercolor. "I noticed you looking at this all night," he said, extending it toward me. "I think it belongs with you." I stared. "I can't accept this. You paid for something that means more to you than it does to me," he interrupted gently. "I'm a corporate attorney. I bill enough hours to occasionally do something that makes me feel human. Let me have this one." His smile was self-deprecating and completely disarming. "At least let me buy you coffee," I heard myself say. "How about dinner instead?" He extended his hand. "Daniel Mitchell, Claire Harper." I said, taking his hand and feeling something fundamental click into place. We had dinner the next evening at the old pink house, talking about everything his corporate law work, my design dreams, our shared love of Savannah's architecture. He told me about growing up in Charleston, choosing law because he believed in justice, but finding himself defending corporate interests instead. "Sometimes I wonder if I took a wrong turn," he admitted. "But maybe the right turn is still coming." I told him about wanting to restore old homes and bring them back to life. "You light up when you talk about it," he observed. "That's how you know it's right. When just talking about it makes you glow." 4 months later, he proposed on River Street at sunset, the real scene painting itself gold around us. "Marry me." He said no ring yet because he wanted me to choose it, just his hands holding mine. "Build a life with me. Buy a beautiful old house and make it ours." I said yes before he finished talking. We married 8 months after meeting a small ceremony in Forsyth Park. Margaret was my maid of honor, though I caught her watching Daniel with an expression I couldn't quite read. At the time, I dismissed it as surprise that her younger sister had first married well. I should have paid more attention. We found the house on Bull Street 6 months after our wedding. A Victorian built in 1878, 3 stories of heart pine floors and crown molding wraparound porch. It needed everything new plumbing, updated electrical, a kitchen last renovated in the 60s. "It's a disaster," Daniel said, walking through rooms where wallpaper peeled. "It's perfect," I countered, seeing past damage to the bones underneath. He looked at me the way he had at the auction, like I was showing him something he'd been missing. "Then let's make it perfect together." $650,000 was a stretch. Daniel had just made partner, and I was building my client base slowly. We'd need to do renovation work ourselves, live in construction dust, defer some dreams. But standing in that empty living room with light streaming through tall windows, I could see our future. Dinner parties and Christmas mornings. Maybe a nursery upstairs painted something soft and hopeful. "We'll make it work," Daniel said, and we did. We spent 2 years bringing that house back to life. Daniel learned to refinish floors on YouTube. I haunted estate sales for period fixtures. We painted every room ourselves, argued good-naturedly about colors, celebrated each finished space with takeout on the floor. The house became ours in a way beyond ownership papers. It was every evening stripping wallpaper, every weekend at the hardware store, every small victory when something worked exactly right. Our sweat and vision soaked into those walls until you couldn't separate the house from our marriage. This is what Margaret wanted to take. Not just property, but the physical embodiment of our love story. Every restored board was a memory. Every paint color was a compromise we'd reached together. Every room held moments I'd never get back. Standing in that living room 10 years ago, I'd imagined a future. Children playing in the garden I'd plant, growing old with Daniel in rocking chairs on that porch. A lifetime of small, precious moments. The children never came, though we tried. But the lifetime I'd thought we had I'd thought we had decades ahead. Instead, I had 9 years, 6 months, and 3 days, and a sister who thought she could use my grief to steal what we'd built. She'd picked the wrong widow. Because Daniel had taught me to see beauty, yes, but he'd also taught me to protect it. And he'd made sure I'd have the tools to protect this house, this memory, this last physical piece of the life we'd shared. Margaret didn't know it yet, but when she forged that document, she'd already lost. Daniel had made certain of that. For years, we tried to have children. Tried and failed. The trying started innocently enough, stopping birth control tracking cycles, timing intimacy with the precision of a military operation. When nothing happened after a year, we saw specialists. They ran tests, used words like unexplained infertility, that somehow made it worse because there was no clear problem to fix, no solution to pursue. Just absence, just the ghost of children we'd never hold. We started IVF in 2015, the same year we finished renovating the house. I remember the bitter irony of painting what we'd hoped would be a nursery, while injecting hormones that turned me into someone I barely recognized, weepy, angry, bloated, desperate. The first round failed, so did the second. It's normal, the doctors said. Many couples need multiple attempts. The third round drained our savings account and our hope in equal measure. I spent 2 weeks after the transfer lying perfectly still on our couch, terrified that moving wrong might dislodge the embryos we'd paid $15,000 to create. Daniel brought me meals, read to me, held my hand while we waited. The pregnancy test came back negative. I remember the drive home from that appointment sitting in silent shock while Daniel navigated traffic. Neither of us spoke because what was there to say? We'd invested everything, money, time, our bodies, our hearts, into something that simply wouldn't happen. We can try again, I said finally, my voice hollow. Daniel pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. He sat there for a long moment, hands still gripping the wheel. Or we can stop, he said quietly. Claire, I love you. I wanted children with you because I wanted to share parenting with you, to see the world through their eyes with you. But you're not a means to an end. You're the end. You and me, that's enough. I cried then, finally, all the grief I'd been holding back flooding out. Daniel held me in our car in our driveway of our beautiful house while I mourned the future we'd imagined. We tried one more time, fourth round our last shot. We'd mortgaged our dreams on this final attempt, agreeing that whether it worked or not, we were done. It didn't work. That night, we sat on our back porch swing, Daniel's arm around me, watching fireflies in the garden I'd planted. We can still have a beautiful life, he said. Travel. Build your business into something amazing. Restore another house someday. We can still have joy and purpose and meaning. We can have each other. You and me, I whispered, that's enough. And slowly, painfully, we rebuilt our dreams around that truth. We traveled Barcelona, New Zealand, a road trip through the American West. I threw myself into my design business, pouring the nurturing instinct I'd planned for children into creating beautiful spaces for other people's families. Daniel supported every pivot, every new direction, every redefinition of what our life would look like. We renovated the house room by room until it was featured in Southern Living. We hosted dinner parties. We became the aunt and uncle who spoiled other people's children. We found ways to make our childless life full instead of empty. But there was always an ache. Always that nursery I'd painted sage green that became Daniel's home office instead. Always the slight flinch when someone asked if we had kids. Always the awareness of roads not taken. Margaret existed in the periphery of this pain, though I didn't fully understand the resentment brewing there until much later. My older sister had always been the wild child, 10 years my senior. She'd been in high school when I was still losing baby teeth. Growing up, I'd idolized her, desperate for her attention, crushed when she found me annoying. As adults, that dynamic shifted into something more complicated. Margaret never quite found her footing. She cycled through jobs, receptionist, retail manager, administrative assistant, never staying anywhere longer than a year or two. Her relationships followed the same pattern. Boyfriends who seemed promising at first but revealed themselves as unreliable, sometimes cruel. She married Gary when she was 43, a man who seemed kind enough but lacked ambition, working warehouse jobs that barely covered their rent. Meanwhile, I built a successful design firm. I married a man who adored me. I lived in a house worth more than Margaret would probably earn in a lifetime. I didn't realize I was winning a competition I hadn't known we were having. But the signs were there. When I showed Margaret my engagement ring, she'd said, "Must be nice to land a lawyer." When we bought the house, she'd commented, "Some people have all the luck." No, when my business was featured in a local magazine, she'd mentioned she'd thought about interior design once, but never had the privilege of pursuing hobbies as a career. Each accomplishment I shared was met with a barb disguised as support. Each success required an apology I didn't understand I was making. Our parents saw it differently. Margaret was the one who needed help, so help was what they provided. Rent money when she was short, groceries when times were tight. a down payment for her wedding that somehow never needed to be repaid. They worried about her constantly, which translated into making excuses for her behavior and bankrolling her poor decisions. When I pointed out this pattern, once my mother said, "You have Daniel to take care of you. Margaret only has herself." The implication being that my success was contingent on marriage, not merit, that I hadn't earned what I had just lucked into a good man. I tried to be supportive anyway. I hired Margaret as a temporary assistant once when she was between jobs. I sent birthday gifts and invited her to holidays and pretended not to notice the resentment simmering beneath her smiles. "She's your only sister," Daniel would remind me when I complained. "Family is important. Try to stay close." So I tried. I swallowed my hurt at her comments. I made allowances for her moods. I told myself that her struggles excused her attitude, that if our positions were reversed, I might feel the same way. I wish now that I'd questioned that logic sooner, that I'd recognized how toxic family loyalty becomes when it requires accepting mistreatment. That I'd understood earlier what Daniel would eventually see. Margaret didn't want to be close to me. She wanted what I had. We had a beautiful life, different than planned, but full. Daniel and I created meaning from our childlessness, found purpose in work and travel, and the deep partnership of a marriage built on choice, not obligation. But Margaret was always watching from the sidelines, tallying what I had against what she lacked, building a case for why she deserved more and I deserved less. And when Daniel died, leaving me vulnerable and grief-stricken, she finally saw her opening. I wish I'd paid more attention to her expression at our wedding, that look I'd dismissed as surprise. I wish I'd recognized the resentment for what it was, not admiration, but envy. Not happiness for me, but bitterness at what I represented. But hindsight is 20/20, and grief makes us trust the wrong people. Margaret was counting on that. 5 years ago, everything changed when Mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and Dad's cancer returned. The family meeting happened at my parents' house just 6 blocks from mine. Mom had been forgetting things for months, appointments, conversations where she'd parked. We dismissed it as aging until she got lost driving home from the grocery store she'd shopped at for 30 years. The neurologist's diagnosis came first: early-stage Alzheimer's, progressive, no cure. 2 weeks later, Dad's oncologist delivered worse news. The prostate cancer he'd beaten 5 years earlier had metastasized. Stage 4, maybe 2 years, probably less. My father was 74, my mother 71, and suddenly they needed care that would consume someone's entire life. We gathered around their dining room table, me, Daniel, Margaret, Gary, trying to solve an impossible problem. Mom and Dad sat in the living room, Dad already moving slowly from pain. Mom asking every few minutes where we were. Assisted living. I suggested, though it felt like betrayal. "With what money?" Margaret asked bluntly. "They're on fixed income. Memory care facilities run $7,000 a month. They'd burn through savings in a year." She was right. Dad had been a postal worker, Mom a teacher's aide. Social Security, a modest pension equity in their house, not enough for years of specialized care. "We could help financially," Daniel offered. "Split the costs." "I'll do it," Margaret said, suddenly standing. "I'll move in, take care of them." Gary looked stricken. "That's years of your life." "They're my parents," Margaret said, and for the first time in years, I heard something beyond resentment in her voice, something like purpose. "They raised us. Now it's my turn." I felt relief, shame, and gratitude collide. Relief because my business was taking off, because Daniel's practice demanded brutal hours, because I knew I couldn't do what Margaret was offering. Shame for exactly those reasons, gratitude that she would step up when I couldn't. "We'll help however we can," I promised. "Money, groceries, whatever you need." Margaret nodded, but something flickered in her eyes. She moved in the next week. Gary kept his warehouse job, helping after shifts with the heavy lifting. But the daily burden fell on Margaret. And it was crushing. I watched my sister age a decade in 5 years. Her hair grayed, lines carved themselves around her mouth. She gained weight from stress, then lost it from forgetting to eat. Her hands developed a tremor from exhaustion. The calls started within months. Margaret crying about Mom wandering at night, Dad's pain medication, failing the soul-crushing repetition, bathing bodies that had once bathed you, watching intelligent people forget their children's names. I helped how I could. Sunday visits with groceries, arranging cleaning services and meal delivery, paying for home health aides, though Margaret resented strangers. Daniel and I covered medical expenses. And unbeknownst to me, Daniel started sending Margaret monthly checks, $1,100 deposited quietly. But I didn't move in. I didn't quit my career. I didn't sacrifice my marriage to caregiving. And Margaret never let me forget it. "Must be nice to visit on Sundays," she'd say. "Play the good daughter for an hour, then go back to your beautiful life." "I'm helping as much as I can," I'd reply, stung. "With money. Money's easy when you have it. You're not here at 3 a.m. when Dad's screaming. You're not watching Mom forget how to swallow. You're not giving up everything." She was right, and the guilt gnawed at me. Dad lasted 18 months. The cancer consumed him until there was nothing but agony and morphine. He died in February 2022 in a hospital bed in his living room, Margaret holding one hand, me the other. At the funeral, people called Margaret a saint. Not many would make that sacrifice. Nobody called me a saint. Mom deteriorated rapidly after Dad died, as if she'd been holding on for him. The Alzheimer's accelerated. She stopped recognizing us, trapped in some distant decade. She lasted 8 more months. When Mom died that October, I thought Margaret could finally rest. 5 years, prime years of her life given to caregiving. Surely now she could focus on herself, on Gary, on building something beyond exhaustion. What I didn't understand was that those 5 years had fermented into something toxic. Every Sunday I'd visited for 2 hours, Margaret had been there round the clock. Every check I'd written, she'd seen as insufficient payment. Every time our parents praised my business or home, Margaret heard, "Claire got everything, Margaret got nothing." She'd kept score, and in her accounting, I owed her. I didn't see it. I was too busy grieving, too focused on supporting my sister through shared loss. I paid for both funerals. I helped clean out the house. I hugged her at the cemetery. "They loved you so much," I said. They knew how lucky they were. Did they? Margaret asked something dangerous in her voice. Or did they just love having someone willing to give up their life while you kept yours? I thought it was grief talking, exhaustion. I thought time would heal it. I was catastrophically wrong. Margaret had spent 5 years watching me live the life she wanted. 5 years convinced she'd been cheated. 5 years building a case for why she deserved compensation. And when Daniel died 6 months later, leaving me vulnerable and drowning in grief, Margaret saw her opening. She'd spent 5 years caring for dying parents. Now she'd spend her energy destroying me, convincing herself it was justice. I should have seen the warning signs, the resentment that never faded, the pointed questions about my house value, business income, what Daniel left me, the comments about how some people inherit money while others inherit burdens. But grief blinds you to danger, especially when it comes wrapped in family loyalty. Margaret counted on that blindness, and I gave her exactly what she needed. The warning signs started 3 years before Daniel died. The first incident happened at a family dinner in late 2021. We'd invited Margaret over to celebrate her new job as office manager. Daniel made his famous lasagna, and we'd opened good wine. The evening was pleasant until I excused myself to take a work call that dragged on 20 minutes. When I returned, the atmosphere had shifted. Daniel looked uncomfortable, rigid. Margaret was sitting in my chair right next to his, her hand on his forearm, laughing at something I'd missed. "Sorry about that," I said. Margaret jumped, withdrawing her hand. "Daniel was just telling me about his case," she said brightly. "He's so brilliant. You're lucky to have him." Something in her tone felt off, but I dismissed it. Too much wine family familiarity. Later that night, Daniel sat on our bed with that expression he got when he had difficult news. "I need to tell you something. I won't keep secrets from you." He explained that while I was on the phone, Margaret had made a pass. Inappropriate comments about how lucky I was, suggestions that he deserved someone who truly appreciated him, someone who put him first. When I shut it down, she laughed it off, said she was joking that I was too uptight. I felt anger and embarrassment. She'd had too much wine. "Claire." Daniel took my hand. "This wasn't about wine. This was deliberate." We decided to let it go as isolated. Margaret had always pushed boundaries, needed attention. Surely this was just another example of poor judgment. It wasn't isolated. Over the next months, Margaret found ways to touch Daniel when I wasn't looking, hand on his shoulder, standing too close. She sent texts that walked the line between friendly and flirtatious, asking advice about things she'd never cared about before calling late at night with emergencies that weren't. Each time Daniel shut it down immediately. Each time he told me within hours. He saved every text, documented every incident, because that's who Daniel was: methodical, prepared. The breaking point came in spring 2022 after our parents died. Margaret showed up at Daniel's office without an appointment, claiming she needed legal advice about the estate. His secretary later told me Margaret had dressed up new outfit, makeup, strong perfume. Daniel met with her professionally, door open, secretary present. Afterwards, Margaret sent a text that crossed every line. "Thank you for today. You've always been so kind, so attentive in ways others aren't. Makes a woman wonder what might have been if things were different." Daniel showed me the moment he got home. "We need to do something. She's not stopping." We confronted my parents the next day. I'm sure Margaret didn't mean anything inappropriate. My mother said, using that southern tone reserved for defending the indefensible. "She's just grateful. You might be misinterpreting friendly affection." My father was more direct. "Daniel, you're successful and good-looking. Women probably flirt with you constantly. Margaret's family. I think you're reading too much into normal behavior." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're right. I'm probably being too sensitive." But in the car, he said, "They'll never believe it. They've made excuses for her so long they can't see what she really is. What do we do? Create distance, document everything, just in case." In case of what? In case she escalates. People who feel rejected don't always let go gracefully. The next week, Margaret sent another late-night text. "Can't stop thinking about our conversation. You understand me in ways Gary never has. Maybe we should talk more, just the two of us." Daniel blocked her number that night. He also called Henry Caldwell his mentor from early law career. Henry had his own firm now handling estate planning and family law with discretion and experience. "I need advice," Daniel told him. "My sister-in-law has been making unwanted advances. I've rejected her repeatedly, but she's not stopping. How do I protect my wife and our marriage?" Henry Caldwell was early 60s, silver hair, reading glasses, making him look professorial. He listened without judgment, took notes. "Document everything," he said finally. "Save every text, every email. Write down dates and details. You never know what might become relevant." "You think this could escalate?" I asked. Henry looked at me over his glasses. "Mrs. Mitchell, in my experience, people who feel entitled to what belongs to others rarely stop wanting it because they're told no. Your sister has spent years watching you build a life she wanted. That kind of resentment combined with rejection can become dangerous. Better to prepare for the worst." We followed his advice. Daniel started keeping a journal, not just Margaret's advances, but everything. The monthly checks he sent her, medical bills we paid, ways we supported her during our parents' illness. He documented our marriage, our finances, our childlessness. "It feels paranoid," I said, watching him write one evening in our garden. "Maybe," Daniel agreed. "But if something ever happens to me, I want you protected. Margaret already resents everything you have. If she sees an opportunity to take it, she will. I won't leave you defenseless." He pulled me close. "Promise me something. If anything happens to me, accident, illness, whatever, promise you'll go to Henry. Promise you'll use every resource I'm leaving you. Don't let guilt or family loyalty make you vulnerable. Nothing's going to happen to you." I said, because I was 36 and he was 33 and we were supposed to have decades. Promise anyway. So I promised, not understanding that less than 2 years later, I'd be keeping it. That Daniel's preparation would be the only thing standing between me and Margaret's calculated betrayal. Margaret's advances stopped after the block or went underground. She was still there at gatherings, still watching with that resentful expression. But she kept her distance, stayed behind the boundary Daniel had drawn. I thought we'd solved the problem. I thought her obsession had burned itself out. I didn't realize she was just waiting, biding her time until the perfect moment. And when Daniel died, leaving me alone and grieving, Margaret finally got the opening she'd been waiting for. All that preparation, the documentation, the meetings with Henry, the careful record-keeping had seemed excessive at the time. It would turn out to be the only thing that saved me. Around this same time, Daniel faced a medical issue that would later become the key to everything. He'd been experiencing pain for weeks, a dull, persistent ache that he initially dismissed as nothing serious. But when it persisted, interfering with his sleep and making it uncomfortable to sit through long court sessions, he finally scheduled an appointment with a urologist. Dr. Jonathan Price was a no-nonsense physician in his 50s who'd been practicing in Savannah for decades. After an examination and ultrasound, he delivered his diagnosis: varicocele enlarged veins within the scrotum, similar to varicose veins in the legs, but more problematic given the location. It's relatively common, Dr. Price explained, showing us the ultrasound images in his office. About 15% of men develop them. Most are minor and don't require treatment, but yours is significant enough that I'd recommend surgery. What does the surgery involve? Daniel asked, his hand finding mine. We'll make a small incision and tie off the affected veins to redirect blood flow. Standard procedure, low risk. However, Dr. Price paused, removing his reading glasses. Given the extent of your varicocele and its location, I'd strongly recommend we perform a vasectomy during the same surgery. The word hung in the air between us. A vasectomy, I repeated, my voice hollow. The varicocele is extensive enough that there's significant risk of recurrence if we don't address the underlying vascular issues, Dr. Price explained. Additionally, given your medical history of failed IVF attempts and considering you've already made the decision not to pursue further fertility treatments, the vasectomy eliminates future complications and provides better long-term outcomes. Daniel and I sat in silence, processing. We'd stopped trying for children 3 years earlier, had made peace with our childless life. But there was something final about surgical sterility. Something that closed a door we'd already walked away from, but never quite locked. Can we think about it? I asked. Of course, but I wouldn't wait too long on the varicocele repair itself. The pain will only worsen. We talked about it for days, late-night conversations in our garden, weighing options that felt simultaneously momentous and moot. We'd already decided not to have children. This was just making that decision permanent. It's the right choice medically, Daniel said finally, and honestly, it feels like closing a chapter we've already finished reading. Moving forward instead of leaving doors open to rooms we're never going to enter. You're sure? I asked. He pulled me close. I'm sure about us. I'm sure about our life together. Everything else is just logistics. The surgery was scheduled for mid-June 2021. It went smoothly. Dr. Price repaired the varicocele and performed the vasectomy as planned. Daniel recovered at home for a week, moving gingerly and joking that he'd finally found the one type of pain that made litigation seem pleasant by comparison. But during that recovery week, as I brought him meals in bed and he caught up on reading with an ice pack discreetly positioned, Daniel said something that seemed paranoid at the time. "Margaret isn't done," he said one afternoon as we sat in our garden, him moving slowly, carefully. "I have a feeling she might try something more drastic one day, something beyond inappropriate texts." "Like what?" I asked, thinking he was being overly cautious. "I don't know, but people who feel rejected and entitled are unpredictable. And now with Mom and Dad gone, there's no buffer. No one she has to behave for." "What should we do?" "Prepare," Daniel said simply. "Document everything we can, not just her behavior, but our entire life, our finances, our decisions, our marriage, everything." The following week, despite still recovering, Daniel scheduled another meeting with Henry Caldwell. I went with him to Henry's office, watching as my husband methodically detailed everything: Margaret's advances, his rejections, our decision to maintain distance, and now the recent surgery. "I want everything documented," Daniel told Henry. "Medical records confirming the vasectomy, our financial records showing we've supported Margaret over the years, my will properly executed. Everything." Henry studied Daniel thoughtfully. "You're expecting trouble." "I'm expecting that if something ever happens to me, accident, sudden illness, whatever my wife will be vulnerable." Margaret resents Claire. She feels entitled to what we have, and I won't leave Claire unprotected. "Prudent," Henry said. "Let's create a comprehensive file. Over the next weeks, we assembled everything. Daniel's medical records from Dr. Price, including detailed documentation of the vasectomy and follow-up tests confirming its success. Our financial records showing years of support for Margaret, the monthly $1,100 payments. Daniel had been sending the medical bills we'd covered the assistance we'd provided. Daniel drafted a new will properly notarized and witnessed by 2 partners at his firm, leaving everything to me with explicit language that this represented his final wishes. Henry kept copies of everything in his office files, but Daniel wanted one more layer of protection. He suggested we rent a safety deposit box at our bank and create what he called our disaster preparation kit. "You really think this is necessary?" I asked as we filled out paperwork at Savannah Bank and Trust. "I think hope for the best, prepare for the worst is more than a cliche," Daniel said. "I think it's how you protect the people you love." The banker led us to the vault, left us alone in the small viewing room. Daniel carefully placed documents in the metal box copies of his medical records, the legitimate will printouts of Margaret's inappropriate texts, his journal documenting every incident, the letter from Henry confirming everything. Then he pulled out a sealed envelope from his briefcase. My name was written across the front in his distinctive handwriting, that same signature I'd seen thousands of times, the one I'd later recognize as forged on Margaret's fake document. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," Daniel said softly. "If something happens to me and you need to access this box, you'll need to know why I did all this. Consider it an explanation from beyond if necessary." "Don't talk like that," I said, my voice catching. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "Probably not," he agreed, placing the envelope at the bottom of the box. "I plan to be around to deal with Margaret's drama for at least another 50 years. But if the worst happens, I want you to know I thought of everything. I want you to know you're protected." He closed the box, locked it, and pulled me into his arms there in that sterile bank vault. "I love you beyond words, beyond time, beyond whatever comes next," he whispered. "Everything I do, every precaution, every document, every preparation is an act of love. Remember that." I nodded against his chest, thinking he was being overly dramatic. We were young, healthy, with decades ahead of us. This safety deposit box was just Daniel being thorough, being the methodical attorney he'd always been. I had no idea that 2.5 years later, I'd return to this bank alone, that I'd sit in the same viewing room with shaking hands opening that box with a key that felt impossibly heavy, that I'd unseal that envelope and read Daniel's final words to me, written in a moment of foresight that seemed paranoid then, but would prove to be salvation. I had no idea that everything Daniel had prepared, every document, every precaution, every act of love disguised as paranoia would be the only thing standing between me and my sister's calculated attempt to destroy me. But Daniel knew, somehow he knew, and he made sure I'd be ready. That terrible Tuesday morning started like any other. Daniel woke before me as he usually did, showering and dressing for work while I lingered in bed enjoying the sound of him moving through our house. He came back to kiss me goodbye, his hair still damp smelling of his cedar soap. "Head's killing me," he said, rubbing his temple. "Worst migraine I've had in years." I sat up concerned. "Stay home, cancel your meetings, rest." "Can't," he said, already pulling on his suit jacket. "Major client presentation this morning. I've been preparing for weeks. It's just a migraine. I'll take some Excedrin power through it." "Daniel, I'll be fine," he insisted, kissing me again. "I'll call you after the meeting. We can have lunch if I'm feeling better. Love you." "Love you," I replied, watching him walk out of our bedroom. Those were the last words we said to each other. The call came at 10:43. I was at a client's house discussing paint colors for their nursery irony I'd only process later when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Memorial University Hospital. Your husband was brought in by ambulance about 20 minutes ago. You need to come immediately." The world tilted. "What happened? Is he okay?" "The doctor will explain when you arrive. Please come as quickly as you can." I don't remember the drive. I remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel, remember running red lights, remember praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Please let him be okay. Please let it just be the migraine. Please don't take him from me. A doctor met me in the emergency room, young maybe 30, with exhausted eyes that told me everything before he spoke. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Ramirez. I'm so sorry. Your husband suffered a massive brain aneurysm. It was catastrophic and immediate. We did everything we could, but he didn't survive. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. The words made no sense. Daniel couldn't be gone. He'd kissed me 3 hours ago. He'd complained about a migraine. Migraines don't kill people. This was a mistake. Wrong patient. Wrong wife. Wrong universe. They led me to a room where my husband's body lay on a gurney, still wearing his suit, his face peaceful, as if he'd just fallen asleep during a long deposition. I touched his hand, already cooling already, not quite his, and something inside me fractured so completely, I wasn't sure it would ever be whole again. He was 36 years old. We were supposed to have decades. The next days passed in a fog of impossible decisions. Funeral arrangements, death certificates, notifications. Henry Caldwell appeared at my door the evening Daniel died, pulling me into a fierce hug. I'll handle everything, he said. The legal paperwork, notifying the firm, coordinating with the funeral home. You just breathe. Just exist. Let me take care of the rest. I don't know what I would have done without him. Rachel flew in from Atlanta the next morning, moved into our guest room without asking, managed the endless stream of visitors bringing casseroles I couldn't eat and condolences I couldn't absorb. She answered the phone, accepted flowers, made coffee, and sat with me in silence when I couldn't bear conversation. I couldn't sleep in our bed. Daniel's side was too empty, too present in its absence. I spent nights on the couch, wrapped in one of his shirts, the one that still smelled like him, watching dawn break through windows in a house that felt haunted by the future we'd never have. The funeral was held on Saturday, March 6th at Independent Presbyterian Church, where we'd married 9 years earlier. The sanctuary was packed. Daniel's colleagues, clients, friends, my design clients, neighbors, people whose lives he'd touched in ways I was only discovering now through their stories. Margaret was there, but barely. She arrived as the service was starting, slipped into a back pew left before the graveside service began. I caught a glimpse of her dark sunglasses, no makeup, hunched shoulders, but she was gone before I could speak to her. At the time, I was too numb to find it strange, too deep in grief to question why my sister wouldn't stay to support me through the worst day of my life. Looking back, I should have wondered, should have asked why she disappeared so quickly, why she avoided eye contact, why her absence felt deliberate rather than considerate. But grief makes you stupid. Grief makes you trust that people who should love you actually do. At the graveside, standing in early March sunshine that felt obscene in its brightness, I watched them lower Daniel into the ground. Henry stood on one side of me, Rachel on the other, both holding me upright when my legs threatened to give out. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. We were supposed to grow old together, watch our renovated house age gracefully, travel to all the places we'd dreamed about, sit on our porch in matching rocking chairs, finishing each other's sentences. Instead, I had a grave to visit and a house full of memories that cut like glass. The week after the funeral blurred into a fog of medication for sleep I couldn't manage and meals I couldn't taste. I walked through our house like a ghost, touching Daniel's things, his coffee mug still in the dishwasher, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his suits in the closet, smelling of his cologne. I should have donated them, should have started the process of moving forward, but I couldn't. Couldn't pack away the physical evidence that he'd existed, that we'd been happy, that I hadn't just imagined the best 9 years of my life. On Thursday, 1 week after the funeral, 8 days after Daniel died, my mother called. "Claire, honey, I know you're grieving, but Margaret's birthday party is Saturday. She'd be so hurt if you didn't come. Family is important, especially now. Daniel always said that, remember, he'd want you to support your sister." I wanted to scream. Daniel was dead. How could she expect me to attend a birthday party when I could barely function? But guilt is powerful, especially when wrapped in a dead man's supposed wishes. "I don't know if I can," I said. "Margaret sacrificed so much for our family," my mother pressed. 5 years caring for your daddy and me. The least we can do is show up for her birthday. It would mean the world to her. Something in her tone made me too tired to argue. "I'll try. That's my girl. Saturday at 2. Just for an hour, you can do this." Saturday morning, I stood at Daniel's grave with flowers I'd bought because it seemed like what widows did. The headstone wasn't installed yet, just a temporary marker with his name and dates that didn't seem possible. March 1st, 2024. He'd been gone 1 week. It felt like years. It felt like minutes. I miss you. I told the earth that covered him. I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to exist in a world where you don't. The flowers looked ridiculous sitting on fresh dirt. Nothing about this was right. That afternoon, I forced myself to shower dress wrap a gift I'd bought weeks earlier for an occasion I couldn't remember agreeing to attend. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, hollow-eyed pale, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to my husband's funeral, because I owned nothing else that seemed appropriate for a woman drowning. 1 week after we buried Daniel, I drove to Margaret's rental house with a wrapped scarf and exhaustion so deep I could barely see the road. I should have trusted my instincts and stayed home. Should have said no to my mother, should have prioritized my grief over family obligation, should have recognized that something about Margaret's insistence felt wrong. But I went, and that's when Margaret made her move. The party was already in full swing when I arrived. I parked behind a line of cars, took several deep breaths, forced myself to grab the wrapped gift. Every instinct screamed to drive away, go home to my empty house and grief. But Southern propriety and maternal guilt propelled me forward. Linda Pierce opened the door before I could knock eyes widening. "Oh, Claire, you made it. Margaret will be so pleased." That hesitation should have warned me. The living room was decorated with blue balloons, a happy 48th birthday banner stretched across one wall. About 20 people milled around neighbors Margaret's co-workers, Gary standing in the corner, looking like he wanted to disappear. When Gary saw me, his face went pale. He looked away quickly. Conversation stopped as I entered. Heads turned. The energy shifted, not with usual sympathy for the widowed, but with something else. Anticipation, like spectators gathering for an execution. I felt the prickle of walking into something orchestrated. But what could I do? Leave and confirm whatever narrative Margaret had built. Southern women don't make scenes. We smile through discomfort and address problems privately. So I smiled, accepted condolences, set my gift beside cheaper offerings, took sweet tea I wouldn't drink. Margaret made her entrance 15 minutes later with theatrical timing, emerging from the hallway like an actress taking the stage. She wore a new dress from a downtown boutique, easily $200 with fresh highlights. For someone claiming financial desperation, she knew how to dress for the occasion. "Claire," she called, voice carrying. "I'm so glad you came. It means everything, especially after everything you've been through." She hugged me for the audience. Up close, I saw barely contained excitement in her eyes, the flush that had nothing to do with birthday celebration. "I need to tell everyone something," Margaret announced, tapping her glass. Immediate silence. "First, thank you all for coming. Turning 48 isn't a milestone, but after these years, I'm grateful." She paused for sympathetic murmurs about her caregiving sacrifice. "As many of you know, I gave up 5 years to care for my dying parents. 5 years of bathing them, feeding them, managing medications, holding their hands. I did it because it was right." My stomach clenched. "Here it comes." "My sister Claire was very busy during that time." Her voice sharpened. "Building her successful business, living in her beautiful house, traveling with her wonderful husband. I don't blame her, she had her own life. But the burden fell entirely on Gary and me. Complete quiet, people shifting uncomfortably. Before Daniel passed, her voice caught perfectly. We had an important conversation. He knew what I'd sacrificed. He knew Claire's inheritance helped buy that house. And he wanted to make things right. She pulled out a folded document with careful reverence. "Daniel signed this agreement 3 months ago, promising fair compensation for my caregiving. We agreed that meant at least half the house's value, $325,000. Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret held up the paper triumphantly. "I didn't want to bring this up so soon. I wanted to give Claire time to grieve. But I'm facing eviction and I can't wait. Claire, honey, I know this is difficult, but Daniel wanted this. He wanted to take care of me the way I took care of our parents." Every eye turned to me. I stood there and felt something close to dark amusement, because I could see the signature from where I stood, and I recognized it not as Daniel's, but as a forgery. Close but wrong. The slant too steep, the flourish too pronounced, the connecting stroke slightly off. I'd watched Daniel sign his name thousands of times, on our marriage license, mortgage documents, birthday cards, grocery lists. I knew his signature, like I knew his face. That signature was a lie. "May I see it?" My voice remarkably calm. Margaret's confidence flickered before she handed it over, the paper warm from her hand, damp from nervous perspiration. I unfolded it slowly, aware of everyone watching. Worse than I'd thought. Legal language amateurish, pieced from internet templates. Formatting wrong. The date claimed December, when Daniel and I had been in Charleston for our anniversary, nowhere near Margaret. No notary stamp, and that signature painfully obviously wrong to anyone who knew Daniel's hand. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what I knew that Margaret didn't. The preparations we'd made, the documents we'd stored, the truth that would unravel everything. I refolded it and handed it back. "Thank you for sharing this, Margaret. We should discuss this privately. This seems like a family matter, not for a birthday party." Her disappointment was almost comical. She'd expected tears, anger, immediate collapse. She'd staged this for maximum public pressure, and I was refusing my assigned role. "Everyone here deserves to know the truth." Margaret pressed, voice desperate. "I understand," I said. And I did. I understood she'd just committed fraud before 20 witnesses. I understood she'd timed this for my most vulnerable moment. I understood she'd counted on grief making me weak. What she didn't understand was that Daniel had seen her coming. "I need to go." I set down my tea. "Margaret, we'll talk later. Everyone, I apologize for leaving." I walked out with my head high, hands steady, feeling shocked stares follow me. I heard Linda's urgent whisper to Margaret's frustrated response. I made it to my car, closed the door before the laughter escaped. It started small, then grew until tears streamed down my face. Not joy, but a strange mixture of grief, rage, and incredulous disbelief at my sister's audacity. Because I'd seen what Margaret didn't expect. The signature was wrong. The connecting stroke between the D and the A Daniel had a specific way of writing his name, a tiny flourish I'd watched thousands of times. That signature was forged. And there was something else Margaret didn't know, something that made her entire scheme not just cruel and calculated, but fundamentally, biologically impossible. And in the days to come, she was going to find that out. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since Daniel died. I drove to Savannah Bank and Trust before it opened, waiting in the parking lot until Jeffrey Cole, the manager who'd known us for years, unlocked the doors. "Mrs. Mitchell, I was so sorry to hear about Daniel," he said, shaking my hand. "When you called about the safety deposit box, I made sure we'd have privacy. Take all the time you need." He led me through the vault, past rows of metal boxes to the small viewing room. I pulled box 347 from its slot and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I just stared at it. This box contained Daniel's final preparations, his last act of love. Then I opened it. Everything was meticulously organized, labeled in Daniel's precise handwriting. First, his legitimate will, properly notarized, witnessed by 2 partners, dated 6 months ago. Clean legal language, leaving everything to me. No ambiguity. Next, medical records from Dr. Jonathan Price, surgical notes, post-operative reports, and there in clinical language, vasectomy, performed June 15, 2021. Follow-up tests confirming success, 0 sperm count. Biologically impossible to father a child after that date. Then Daniel's journal, leather-bound, filled with his handwriting, documenting every inappropriate interaction with Margaret. Dates, times, exact quotes. October 15, 2021. Margaret placed her hand on my thigh during dinner while Claire was in the kitchen. When I moved away, she said, "You don't have to be so uptight." She made it clear further contact would be limited. March 3, 2022. Margaret appeared at my office without appointment, asked if I ever thought about what might have been. Told her directly there was no what might have been. She laughed it off, but her eyes were cold. Page after page of careful documentation. Printed text messages came next. screenshots dated and saved. You understand me in ways Gary never has. Can't stop thinking about our conversation. A letter from Henry Caldwell confirming he'd witnessed Daniel's will, had copies of all documentation, was available to verify authenticity. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name in Daniel's handwriting. My hand shook as I picked it up. Once I opened this, there would be no more pretending he might walk through the door. But I needed to hear his voice. I carefully opened the envelope. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and you've needed these documents. I hope it's many years from now when we're old and gray and Margaret's antics are just distant memories we laugh about over coffee. But if not, if the worst has happened and she's tried to hurt you in my absence, please know I tried to prepare for every possibility. I know how much you value family, how loyal you are to those you love, even when they don't deserve it. It's one of the things I love most about you. But loyalty shouldn't mean letting yourself be destroyed. Use these documents to protect yourself, Claire. You deserve protection. Margaret has always been jealous of what we have, not because we're perfect, but because we're honest with each other. Real love threatens people who've never experienced it. Don't let her take that away from you, even now that I'm gone. I love you beyond words, beyond time, beyond whatever comes next. You were the best decision I ever made. Everything I did, every document in this box, every precaution was an act of love. Live fully, Claire. Love again when you're ready. I'm not the jealous type, even from beyond. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Forever yours, Daniel. The tears came then unstoppable. I sat alone in that sterile viewing room and sobbed, not just from grief, but from the overwhelming force of being loved so completely that it transcended death. Daniel had known this might happen, had prepared for it, had left me tools to protect myself because he couldn't be here to do it in person. Every precaution was an act of love. I read the letter 3 more times, hearing his voice in every word, feeling his presence so strongly it was almost physical. Then I took a deep breath and began organizing what I needed. Copies of the medical records, proof of the vasectomy. The legitimate will showing Margaret's document for the lie it was. Selected journal pages documenting her advances. Henry's letter confirming everything. Daniel's letter I folded carefully and placed in my purse close to my heart. This wasn't evidence. This was love made tangible. This was my husband's voice reaching across death. I returned the rest to the box, locked it, and left the viewing room. All set, Jeffrey asked. Yes, thank you for your discretion. In my car, I pulled out my phone and called Henry Caldwell. Henry, it's Claire Mitchell. I need to schedule an appointment for this afternoon. It's urgent. Of course, 2 o'clock work. Perfect. Henry, I'm going to need your help. Margaret tried to claim half my house yesterday, said Daniel promised it to her, but I have evidence that proves otherwise. Bring everything, Henry said, voice sharp with professional focus. We'll handle this. I hung up and sat for a moment holding Daniel's letter through the fabric of my purse. Margaret thought she was playing chess. She'd made her opening move at the birthday party, confident that my grief made me vulnerable, that my guilt would make me compliant. What she didn't know was that Daniel had already played the game for me, had anticipated her moves, had left me not just evidence but a roadmap for protection. Margaret thought she was 3 steps ahead. She had no idea I was already at the finish line. Henry Caldwell's law office occupied a converted brownstone in downtown Savannah's historic district. I'd only been here a handful of times with Daniel, but Sandra Hayes, the receptionist, recognized me immediately. Her expression softened with genuine sympathy. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, standing to greet me. Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. Please accept my condolences. Daniel was a wonderful man. Thank you, Sandra. Henry's office was exactly as I remembered, old money and discretion. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound legal tomes, a mahogany desk that had probably been in his family for generations, reading glasses perched on a stack of briefs. He stood when I entered, coming around the desk to embrace me briefly. Claire. He said, his voice warm. I was devastated to hear about Daniel. He was one of the good ones. He gestured to the leather chairs facing his desk. Please sit. Tell me what's happened. I explained the birthday party scene, Margaret's announcement, the fake agreement, the public accusation, designed to humiliate me into compliance. "May I see the document?" Henry asked. I realized with frustration that I'd given it back to Margaret. I returned it to her, but I can describe it. Typed page claiming Daniel signed an agreement promising fair compensation for elder care services rendered. Amount specified as $325,000, half of my house. Henry made notes, his pen moving precisely across a legal pad. And the signature, forged. A decent attempt, but wrong. The connecting stroke between letters was off. Daniel's handwriting had a very specific quality. Date, December, I think. Which is impossible. Daniel and I were in Charleston that entire week for our anniversary. Henry set down his pen, removing his reading glasses. This is amateurish Claire. The legal language is almost certainly wrong. Fair compensation is vague and unenforceable without specific terms. The lack of your signature is another red flag. Agreements involving marital property require both spouses' consent in Georgia. And if there's no notary stamp, it's essentially worthless. He leaned back in his chair. But the fact that she created this at all is deeply troubling. Forgery is a felony. What she's attempting is fraud. I have evidence, I said, pulling the folder from my bag. Daniel prepared for this. Not this specifically, but for the possibility that Margaret might try something. I laid out the contents. The legitimate will properly executed and filed. The medical records from Dr. Price. Daniel's journal. The letter from Henry himself. Henry studied each document carefully, his expression shifting from professional assessment to something like amazement. Daniel was nothing if not thorough, he said, finally reviewing the medical records. These alone disprove any claim about... He paused, glancing up at me. I'm sorry I assumed when you mentioned a fake agreement that Margaret was claiming Daniel had fathered a child, but you said this is about elder care compensation. Yes. She's claiming he promised to pay her for the 5 years she spent caring for our parents. Ah, Henry nodded, refocusing. Well, regardless of the specific claim, these medical records establish a pattern of Daniel's meticulous documentation. The vasectomy information is medically verified and dated. Combined with his journal documenting Margaret's inappropriate advances and his consistent rejections, we have a clear picture of someone who anticipated trouble and prepared accordingly. He tapped the fake agreement description I'd written out. This forgery won't stand up to any scrutiny, but I need to understand what's driving this. People rarely attempt fraud of this magnitude without significant financial pressure. What do you recommend? I recommend we gather more information before deciding on a course of action. Margaret's current financial situation, employment status, why she's suddenly desperate enough to risk felony charges. Henry reached for his phone. I know someone who can help. Frank Delaney, excellent investigator, former detective, completely discreet. He made the call, had a brief conversation, then looked up. Marcus can be here in an hour. Is that acceptable? Marcus Hall. Sorry, I always forget Frank goes by Marcus now. Old habits from when he was on the force. 50 minutes later, Sandra showed a stocky man with sharp eyes into Henry's office. Marcus Hall had the build of someone who'd spent years in physical work and the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading people. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, his handshake firm and professional. Henry tells me your sister's trying to shake you down with a forged document. Let me ask you something. Has Margaret always been good with money, or is she the type who'd be desperate enough to risk a felony? I thought about Margaret's unstable job history, her weak husband, Gary, their rundown rental house, the new dress and fresh highlights she'd worn to the party, despite claiming poverty. Desperate, I said quietly. Marcus nodded, pulling out a small notebook. Then let's find out exactly how desperate. I'll need some basic information: where she lives, works, who she associates with. Anything you can tell me about her financial situation. I provided what I knew, which wasn't much. Margaret's address, Gary's warehouse job, Linda Pierce's name as her closest friend, the fact that she'd mentioned facing eviction at the party. That's a good start, Marcus said, making notes. My preliminary focus will be on her financial situation, debt, income expenses. I'll also look into this alleged agreement more closely. If she had help creating it, I'll find out who and how. How long will this take? I asked. Give me 3 days, Marcus said, standing. I'll have a preliminary report for you by Friday. If there's anything urgent, I'll call sooner." After he left, I sat with Henry in silence for a moment. "You're handling this remarkably well," Henry observed. "Daniel would be proud." "Daniel made sure I could handle it," I replied, touching my purse where his letter rested. He saw this coming. Maybe not the specific scenario, but the possibility that Margaret might try to exploit me at my most vulnerable. That was Daniel. Henry agreed. Always 3 steps ahead. Always protecting the people he loved. I stood to leave, then hesitated. "Henry, what are my options once we have Marcus's report, I mean?" "Several," he said carefully. "We could file criminal charges, forgery, fraud, possibly attempted theft. Given the amounts involved and the deliberate nature of the scheme, she could face serious prison time. Or we could handle this privately. Confront her with the evidence, require full retraction of her claims, and potentially work out an arrangement that protects you while giving her an opportunity to avoid criminal consequences." "You think I should show mercy?" I said. "I think you should consider all options before deciding. Mercy and accountability aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes the most compassionate choice is also the one with the clearest boundaries." I nodded slowly. "Let's see what Marcus finds. Then I'll decide." As I left Henry's office, walking back out into afternoon sunlight, I felt the shift that had started in the bank vault solidify into something concrete. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was taking action. Margaret had made her move, thinking I was too grief-stricken, too guilt-ridden, too concerned with family propriety to fight back effectively. She was about to discover how wrong she was. 3 days later, Marcus called requesting an urgent meeting at Henry's office. His voice carried weight. I'd learned to recognize the tone investigators use when they found something big. Henry's conference room felt smaller with Marcus's presence filling it. He spread documents across the mahogany table with precision, each page positioned deliberately. I sat across from him, Henry beside me, my hands folded to keep them from shaking. "Mrs. Mitchell." Marcus began opening a leather portfolio. "What I found is going to hurt, but by the end you'll understand exactly what your sister's been doing." I knotted my throat tight. "Just tell me." I started with Daniel's finances, bank records, credit cards, Venmo, everything back 7 years. He slid the first document toward me. "Your husband was meticulous. And here's what his records show from July 2014 through October 2019. Daniel sent Margaret regular monthly payments totaling $67,000. The number hit like cold water. 67,000 monthly deposits ranging from $900 to $1,300. Marcus pointed to highlighted entries. July 2014, $1,000 memo, mom's medical. September 1100, dad's PT sessions. December 1200, holiday caregiving coverage. 5 years, 3 months, never missed a payment. Henry leaned forward. Extraordinary documentation. It gets better. Marcus produced another stack. Receipts for services Daniel paid directly: home, health aids, medical equipment, respite care vehicle modifications. $23,000 in services that reduced Margaret's burden, all arranged by Daniel, all benefiting her role as caregiver. My hands shook. I pressed them flat against the table. $90,000 total. And your sister knows it. Marcus's expression hardened. Every Venmo transfer includes a memo. Every bank deposit has a note. Daniel documented everything: his gratitude, his awareness of her sacrifice, his financial support. Margaret can't claim ignorance. The room spun. $90,000. For care, Margaret now claimed she'd provided for free, expecting $325,000 as her reward. So the caretaker agreement is, I started. A shakedown based on a lie. Henry finished. Margaret received significant compensation. Daniel's records prove it. But there's more. Marcus's tone darkened. I looked into Margaret's finances to understand why she'd risk forgery. What I found is worse than desperation. It's calculated theft. He placed a new document before me, a bank statement with my parents' names at the top. Your parents' joint checking account, Marcus said. By 2014, it held approximately $112,000, your father's postal pension, your mother's life insurance, Social Security savings. My chest tightened. Dad always said that account was their safety net. Margaret had power of attorney. Marcus's finger traced withdrawals on the statements. Legitimate at first: medical bills, pharmacy costs, insurance premiums. But then the pattern changes. March 2016, $5,000 ATM withdrawal. 2 weeks later, $4,000 more. June, $7,500. The withdrawals accelerate through 2017, 2018, 2019. By October 2019, when your mother died, the account was empty. Empty. The word barely came out. $95,000 withdrawn over 5 years, Marcus said flatly. I cross-referenced dates with Margaret's personal account. The money went straight to her debts, credit cards, personal loans, mortgage payments when she was 3 months behind. She used your parents' life savings to keep herself afloat. Henry removed his glasses. That's elder financial abuse. In Georgia, that's a felony. Exploitation of an elder person, abuse of power of attorney, 2 to 20 years in prison, if prosecuted. My sister had stolen from our dying parents. There's more, Marcus said quietly. He produced text message printouts. Margaret's phone records, messages between her and her friend Linda Pierce dated February 2025, right after Daniel's death. He read in a flat tone, "Linda, how are you holding up? Margaret, honestly relieved. Claire's grieving, vulnerable. Might be my chance to finally fix everything. The money situation. If I play this right, the house is half mine." Nausea rolled through me. Marcus continued. March 1st. Linda. Did you talk to her? Margaret. Waiting for the right moment. She needs to be desperate enough to believe me, but not angry enough to investigate. Gary says I'm crazy, but he doesn't understand how much we need this. Gary knew the betrayal doubled. He pushed back initially, but went along. Marcus slid the final page across. March 3rd, the day before Margaret came with the forged agreement. Linda. What if she asks for proof? Margaret. I have a document. Looks legitimate enough. She won't question me when she's barely holding it together. Family loyalty will keep her quiet. The words family loyalty burned. I'd built my life on that concept, standing by Margaret, defending her choices, trusting her. And she'd weaponized it. Henry spoke carefully. Claire, you have options. Criminal prosecution is on the table. Elder abuse, forgery, attempted fraud. The DA would likely pursue charges with this evidence. Margaret could face prison time. But you can pursue private resolution, confront her with evidence, demand restitution, ensure she never contacts you again. No criminal record, no trial, but no guarantee of recovering stolen money. Your choice. I stared at the documents, my husband's careful payments, my parents' depleted account, my sister's calculated messages. Part of me wanted justice, wanted Margaret to face full consequences. But another part, the part remembering her singing to our mother during final days, knowing her struggles were real, even if her choices were inexcusable, hesitated. I need to confront her, I finally said. Face to face. Before I decide anything, I need to look her in the eye and let her know I know everything. Every payment Daniel made, every dollar she stole, every lie she planned. Marcus nodded. Confrontation with full evidence often produces confession. I can be there as witness. Henry, too, I said. I want her to understand this isn't family drama anymore. It's documented crime, and I'm holding all the cards. Henry gathered the documents. I'll prepare a comprehensive evidence packet. When you're ready, you'll have everything you need. I stood steadier than I'd felt in weeks. Daniel had prepared for this. He documented every payment, kept every record, built an undeniable case. Even in death, he was protecting me from the person I'd never imagined I'd need protection from. My sister had bet on my grief, my loyalty, my unwillingness to believe the worst. She'd gambled that I'd be too devastated to fight, too trusting to investigate. She'd bet wrong. Set it up, I told Henry. I want to meet with Margaret within the week, and I want her to know she's not leaving that room until she explains every single dollar. That evening, I had my weekly therapy appointment with Dr. Elizabeth Warner. I'd been seeing her since 2 months after Daniel's death, when grief had turned my days into fog and my nights into battlegrounds. She'd once told me, Healing isn't linear, Claire. Some days you'll feel strong and others you'll feel like you're drowning. Both are normal. Tonight I felt like I was drowning in choices. Dr. Warner's office occupied a converted Victorian on Bull Street, all warm lighting and comfortable furniture that made difficult conversations feel safer. She sat across from me in her usual chair, a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and the patience of someone who'd heard every variation of human struggle. "You look exhausted," she observed as I settled onto the couch. "I found out some things today." The words tumbled out Margaret's claim, the forged agreement, Daniel's safety deposit box, Marcus's investigation, all of it. The $90,000 Daniel had already paid. The $95,000 Margaret had stolen from our dying parents. The text messages plotting to exploit my grief. Dr. Warner listened without interruption, her expression neutral but attentive. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "That's a profound betrayal," she finally said. "Multiple betrayals, actually. How are you feeling right now?" "Angry." The word came easily. Furious that she tried to use my grief against me, that she lied about Daniel, that she stole from Mom and Dad while they were helpless. She watched them decline and emptied their accounts. And I hesitated. And guilty. Is that insane I feel guilty because Margaret really did sacrifice those 5 years. I was building my design business in Atlanta while she was changing adult diapers and managing medication schedules. What if I didn't do enough? What if my career mattered more to me than my family? Let me ask you something. Dr. Warner leaned forward slightly. "Did you contribute financially during your parents' care years?" "Yes, I sent money monthly, not as much as Daniel, but probably $12,000 or $15,000 total. I paid for their prescriptions when insurance denied coverage, bought them a hospital bed, covered respite care a few times." "Did you visit?" "Every 6 weeks or so, more toward the end. I called twice a week." I twisted my hands together. But I wasn't there every day like Margaret. Claire elder care is a systemic failure, not a personal one. Dr. Warner's tone was firm but gentle. Our society doesn't support family caregivers adequately. There's no right way to handle it, only impossible choices. You contributed financially and emotionally within the bounds of your life circumstances. That's not abandonment. That's reality. But Margaret suffered. Margaret made choices. Dr. Warner interrupted. She chose to be the primary caregiver. That's admirable. Daniel compensated her substantially for that choice. Your parents presumably appreciated her presence, but her suffering doesn't give her the right to steal forged documents or exploit your vulnerability. Those are separate decisions she made. I felt something loosen in my chest. "So I'm not responsible for what she did?" "No, you're not." Dr. Warner paused. "But I suspect that's not what's really troubling you. You're trying to decide what to do next." She was right. "Henry says I can press criminal charges. Elder financial abuse, forgery, attempted fraud. Margaret could go to prison for years. Marcus says the evidence is overwhelming, but she's still my sister." The words felt heavy. She did care for our parents even if she also stole from them. She's desperate and drowning in debt, and yes, her choices are inexcusable, but sending her to prison, I don't know if I can live with that. "What do you want the outcome to be, Claire?" I thought about it, really thought. I want her to understand what she did was wrong. I want her to face consequences. I want her to acknowledge that Daniel was good to her, that our parents trusted her, and she violated all of it. But I stopped afraid the words would sound weak. "You also want her to get help," Dr. Warner finished. "Yes." Relief flooded through me. "Is that stupid after everything?" "It's compassionate. There's a difference between compassion and being a doormat." She met my eyes. "You can offer help while still demanding accountability. You can set firm boundaries while leaving a path forward. What would Daniel want?" I closed my eyes, hearing his voice in my memory. Firm but fair. Always firm but fair. He'd want justice, but he'd also want mercy. He'd want Margaret to face what she did, but he'd give her a chance to make it right. "What would help you sleep at night?" "Knowing I tried." I opened my eyes. "Knowing I gave her one chance to choose differently to get help, to be honest. And if she rejects that chance, then whatever happens next is on her. Dr. Warner nodded slowly. That's a boundary. A clear, healthy boundary. You're not rescuing her from consequences, you're offering her accountability with support. If she violates that, you'll pursue the legal route. So I confront her with everything I know. I tell her about the evidence, the payments, the embezzlement, the text messages, and then I offer her a deal public confession to the family, full acknowledgement of what she did. And she has to get help, real help therapy, financial counseling. If she accepts, I don't press charges. But if she breaks the deal or comes after me again, everything goes to the district attorney. How does that feel? I sat with the decision testing its weight. It feels right. It feels like something Daniel would approve of. Strong, but not cruel. Claire, that's a powerful choice. Dr. Warner's expression was warm. You're not letting her off, you're giving her a ladder out of the hole she dug. Whether she takes it is up to her. When I left her office, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time since Daniel's death, I wasn't just reacting to life, I was choosing my path forward. The confrontation would be hard, but I was ready. I called Margaret that night from my car parked outside Dr. Warner's building. We need to talk about the agreement, I said, keeping my voice steady. Can you come to my house tomorrow afternoon, just you, not Gary, not Linda? There was a long pause. I knew you'd come around, she said, her tone sounding triumphant. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. She had no idea what was waiting for her. I spent the morning preparing for Margaret's visit the way Daniel would have methodically, thoroughly, with every detail considered. She had no idea what was waiting for her. The living room became a stage. I positioned 2 armchairs facing each other across the coffee table, close enough for conversation, but formal enough to signal this wasn't a casual, sisterly chat. On the table, a digital voice recorder I'd purchased that morning, 2 glasses of water, and a thick folder of documents arranged in precise order. Marcus's investigation report on top, then Daniel's bank statements, then the parents' account records, finally the text messages, each page marked with color-coded tabs. I rehearsed staying calm, practiced keeping my voice level, my questions clear. This wasn't about emotion, it was about truth. I reread Daniel's letter from the safety deposit box, drawing strength from his words. I prepared everything because I love you, and I trust you to be strong when you need to be. Strong, I could be strong. At 1:45, I checked the timeline I'd written out, cross-referenced dates and amounts one final time. Everything aligned. The evidence was overwhelming. I just needed Margaret to talk long enough to trap herself. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. Margaret stood on my porch looking polished navy blazer, pressed slacks, fresh makeup. Her smile carried confidence, even triumph. I knew you'd see reason, Claire, she said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. Family helps family. Right. That's what Mom and Dad would have wanted. I led her to the living room without responding. Let her see the formal setup, the recording device, the folder, waiting like evidence at a trial. Her smile faltered. This feels a bit official. It is official. I gestured to the chair across from mine. Please sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea? No, I'm fine. She sat stiffly, eyeing the recorder. What's all this? I hope you don't mind if we record this conversation. I kept my tone professional, almost clinical. Given the legal nature of what we're discussing, it seems prudent. Georgia is a 2-party consent state, so I need your permission. Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the device. I could see the calculation happening. Refusing would look suspicious, but agreeing meant everything would be documented. Finally, she forced a laugh. Sure, whatever makes you comfortable, though I think this is pretty straightforward. I pressed record. March 13th, 2024, 2:03 p.m. Present are Claire Mitchell and Margaret Thornton. Both parties consent to this recording. Margaret, can you verbally confirm your consent? Yes, I consent. Her voice had lost some of its certainty. Thank you. I folded my hands in my lap, meeting her eyes. Before we discuss your agreement, I want to understand exactly what you're claiming happened. Walk me through it from the beginning. Margaret straightened, launching into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. When Mom and Dad started declining in 2014, someone had to step up. You were in Atlanta building your business, so it fell to me. 5 years, Claire. 5 years of doctor appointments, medication management, adult diapers, sleepless nights. You know how hard that was? I do, I said softly. It was an enormous sacrifice. She seemed surprised by my acknowledgement, relaxing slightly. Daniel understood. He saw what I was going through. He promised compensation, said that when they passed, he'd make sure I was taken care of financially. We discussed the amount agreed on $325,000. He drew up the agreement himself. When exactly did Daniel promise this compensation? What? The question caught her off guard. You said he promised compensation. When did that conversation happen? What month? What year? Early on. Maybe late 2014, early 2015. Before or after Dad's stroke, Margaret's eyes narrowed. Why does that matter? I'm just trying to understand the timeline. I kept my voice gentle, curious. And the amount, $325,000. How was that number determined? It was fair compensation for the work, based on what calculation, an hourly rate, a flat fee per year. I tilted my head. That's roughly $65,000 per year for 5 years. Did you and Daniel discuss it in those terms? We discussed what was fair, Margaret said defensively. He was an attorney. He knew what caregiver compensation looked like. Did anyone else witness these conversations, Gary, Mom, or Dad? No, it was private, between me and Daniel. And the written agreement, when was that created? Before he died. He wanted it documented. How long before? Weeks, months? Margaret shifted in her chair. I don't remember exactly. Does it matter? The document exists. It has his signature. You mentioned last time that Daniel drew it up himself, I continued. Did he print it at home? Email it to you? Did you watch him sign it? Why are you interrogating me? Her voice rose. I thought we were here to settle this, not to... I'm not interrogating. I'm asking questions any probate judge would ask. I paused. Margaret, you're claiming Daniel promised you $325,000 for elder care. That's a significant amount, more than most professional in-home caregivers earn. I need to understand why you never mentioned this agreement while Daniel was alive. Why didn't you bring it up when Mom died? When Dad died? During the funeral? Why wait until now? Because I didn't want to seem greedy. The words burst out. I knew how it would look asking for money right after they passed. I wanted to give it time, wait until things settled. 6 years is a long time to wait. I was grieving too, Claire. I lost them too. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment I saw genuine pain there. Do you think those years were easy for me? Watching them decline, knowing I couldn't save them, and then everyone acts like I just showed up for the inheritance. No one thinks that, I said quietly. Everyone knows you were the primary caregiver. That's not in question. Then why all these questions? Why the recording, the formality, she gestured at the folder. What is all that? Documentation. I said simply, because this is a legal matter and legal matters require evidence. You've presented a claim. I have a responsibility to verify it. Margaret shifted uncomfortably as I asked question after question, each one simple and polite, each one exposing cracks in her story. The dates didn't quite line up. The amounts changed slightly between tellings. Details that should have been vivid, the conversation where Daniel allegedly agreed to the sum, the moment he signed the document, remained frustratingly vague. Why does all this matter? She finally snapped. The document's right there. It has his signature. It's legal. Just agree to the terms and we can move past this. I looked at her, really looked at her and saw the desperation behind the bravado. 5 years of elder care had aged her, leaving exhaustion lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't fully hide. Her hands trembled slightly when she thought I wasn't watching. Her blazer, I noticed, was slightly worn at the cuffs, the hem fraying. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I thought about Daniel's cold body in the hospital, the funeral she'd barely attended, the public humiliation at my birthday party, the text messages plotting to exploit my grief, the $95,000 stolen from our dying parents. I opened the folder on the table. Let's talk about the document, Margaret. Let's talk about everything. If you've made it this far, comment below so I know you're still with me. Here's my question. If you were in Claire's shoes, With all that evidence, would you give Margaret a chance to explain herself or call the authorities immediately? What's your move? Quick note, what follows includes fictional elements for storytelling purposes. You're welcome to pause here if this isn't for you. I placed the first document on the table between us. This is your caretaker compensation agreement. I said, my voice steady. Let me show you something. I pointed to Daniel's signature at the bottom. See this connecting stroke here, the way the D loops into the A. Daniel never signed his name like that, not once in 16 years of marriage. I laid out actual samples of Daniel's signature birthday cards he'd written me, our mortgage documents, his bar association renewal. Each one consistent, each one distinctly different from the forgery Margaret had presented. This is fake Margaret, not even a good fake. Her face paled. Signatures, they can vary. The legal language is wrong too. Henry Caldwell reviewed it, 28 years of estate law experience. He said the terminology is what a layperson thinks legal documents sound like, not how they're actually written. This would never hold up in court. Henry Caldwell doesn't know she started. I placed Daniel's real will on the table, the pages crisp and official. This is Daniel's actual will, properly notarized, filed with the probate court, witnessed by 2 associates at his firm. Dated 6 months ago, long after Mom and Dad passed. Margaret stared at it. As you can see, everything comes to me. There's no mention of elder care compensation, no provision for additional payments to you, nothing. He must have changed his mind after that was drawn up, Margaret said quickly. That's why he created the separate agreement. This will is dated 6 months ago, Margaret. If Daniel wanted to compensate you for past caregiving, why wouldn't his attorney, who he trusted with everything, include it in his official legal will instead of some unsigned, unwitnessed side document? She had no answer. I reached for the next stack of papers, thick with highlighted entries, months and months of transactions. But here's what really matters. Daniel did compensate you, Margaret, monthly. Look. I spread the bank statements, Venmo screenshots, canceled checks across the table, like cards in a winning hand. July 2014, $1,000 memo, Mom's medical expenses. August, $950, Dad's physical therapy. September, $1,100. I went through month after month, my finger tracing each payment. Average of $1,100 monthly for 5 years and 3 months. That's $67,000 in direct payments. Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Plus, I continued pulling out receipts. Daniel paid for medical equipment, home health aides, respite care services, wheelchair van modifications. $23,000 in services that reduced your burden. He documented everything, Margaret. Every dollar, every service, every act of gratitude for your sacrifice. I looked up, meeting her eyes. You received $90,000 from us. How can you claim you were never compensated? Those were gifts, she stammered. Daniel wanted to help, but he promised more. He promised, gifts don't come with memos documenting caregiver support and elder care assistance. These were systematic payments, acknowledging your role, and they total more than most professional caregivers earn. Margaret's face had gone from pale to ashen. Her hands trembled on the armrests. But that's not the worst part. I reached for the documents I'd been dreading, the ones that transform this from family betrayal into criminal act. This is where it gets serious, Margaret. Really serious. I laid out our parents' bank statements, the account that had held their life savings. This is Dad's checking account, the one he opened in 1983 with his first Postal Service paycheck. Remember how proud he was of that account? How he'd say it was their safety net? Margaret's breathing became shallow. In 2014, when you took over their care and received power of attorney, this account held $112,000. Savings from Dad's pension, Mom's life insurance, years of careful Social Security deposits. I pointed to the withdrawals, each one highlighted in yellow. March 2016, $5,000 ATM withdrawal. 2 weeks later, $4,000. June, $7,500. The pattern continues accelerating through 2017, 2018, 2019. I slid the summary sheet toward her. $95,000 withdrawn over 5 years using your power of attorney. I cross-referenced the dates with your personal bank account, Margaret. The money went straight to paying your credit cards, your personal loans, your mortgage when you were 3 months behind. She started. You stole from our dying parents. My voice remained calm, but each word landed like a hammer. You had their trust, their power of attorney access to everything. And you emptied their life savings while they were too sick to protect themselves. They would have wanted me to have it. The words burst out desperately. They would have wanted to help me. Then why didn't you ask? Why didn't you discuss it with them, with me, with anyone? Why did you take it secretly, forging expense reports to cover your tracks? I pulled out another document. These medical bills you submitted to justify withdrawals I checked with the hospital. The actual costs were 60% less than what you claimed. Margaret's face crumpled. In Georgia, this is felony elder financial abuse, exploitation of vulnerable adults, theft by taking abuse of fiduciary duty. 5 to 10 years in state prison, Margaret. That's what you're facing. I was drowning. Her voice broke. We were about to lose the house. Gary lost his job. The debt collectors were calling every day. So you stole from our parents who trusted you and tried to extort money from your grieving sister. I laid out the final pieces, printed text messages, the dates clearly visible. These are from your phone, messages between you and Linda Pierce. I read them aloud, each one more damning than the last. If I play this right, the house is half mine. Claire's grieving vulnerable might be my chance. She won't question me when she's barely holding it together. Family loyalty will keep her quiet. Margaret flinched with each quote. Dave's good with Photoshop, it'll look real enough. That's about the forged agreement, isn't it? Your friend Dave helped you create a fake legal document. I read the final message dated the morning she'd come to my house with her ultimatum. She needs to believe this is real or I'm finished. Gary says I'm crazy, but he doesn't understand how much we need this money. This is my last chance. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Margaret's facade shattered completely. She doubled over, sobbing not the theatrical tears she'd cried at our parents' funerals, but raw, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Mascara ran down her face in dark streams. Her carefully styled hair fell forward, hiding her expression. I didn't know what else to do. She choked out between sobs. We're being evicted. Our credit is destroyed. I haven't slept in months. You have this beautiful house, your successful career, everything Daniel left you. What do I have? Debt exhaustion? Nothing. The desperation in her voice was real. Years of strain and financial terror poured out in broken sentences. Those 5 years destroyed me, Claire. Watching them die, slowly cleaning up after them, listening to them call for their own parents who'd been dead for decades. And where were you building your business in Atlanta, visiting every few weeks like it was enough? I contributed. I started. You sent checks? She looked up, her face blotchy and raw. Do you know what it's like to change your father's diaper while he cries from humiliation? To hold your mother while she screams at you, not remembering who you are? Money doesn't cover that, Claire. Money doesn't pay for what those years cost me. Part of me wanted to reach across the table to comfort her the way I had when we were young, and she'd come to me crying about failed tests or broken hearts. We'd been sisters once close, even before jealousy and resentment had built walls between us. But I'd learned something in the months since Daniel died. Compassion doesn't require participating in someone else's destruction of you. I let her cry. When she finally looked up, mascara smeared across her face, I spoke quietly but firmly. You're right, Margaret. You did sacrifice for Mom and Dad, and you are struggling. But you chose to lie. You chose to steal. You chose to forge documents and defame Daniel when he couldn't defend himself. You chose to exploit my grief at my most vulnerable moment. Those are your choices. She whispered, Are you going to press charges? I took a breath, thinking of Daniel's letter, Dr. Warner's guidance, the path forward I'd chosen. That depends entirely on what you do next. Margaret sat in stunned silence as I explained what would happen next. That depends entirely on what you do next. You're going to tell the truth, I said, publicly, Everyone you told those lies to, you're going to confess. Linda, Gary, anyone at my birthday party who heard that accusation. You'll admit the document was forged, that Daniel already compensated you generously, and that you tried to exploit my grief. Margaret's face was still blotchy from crying, but she listened. You'll apologize to me and to Daniel's memory. You'll acknowledge he was good to you, that he supported you financially throughout the caregiving years, and that what you said about him was a lie. And if I do that, her voice was hollow, then I won't press charges for forgery and fraud. I'll also help with your immediate financial crisis, not half my house, but reasonable assistance. A structured payment plan to help manage your debts. Margaret looked up, confusion mixing with desperate hope. Why would you help me after what I did? Not for you, I said honestly. For Mom and Dad's memory. For the sister you used to be, and because Daniel would want me to choose the high road as long as that road has clear boundaries. I leaned forward. But this comes with conditions, non-negotiable conditions. She nodded, waiting. First, therapy. Immediate regular therapy with a licensed professional. Weekly sessions, minimum 6 months. You need to deal with whatever's underneath this, the resentment, the financial anxiety, the choices you've made. I can't afford. I'll cover it initially. But you have to go, you have to participate honestly, and your therapist will verify attendance. Margaret swallowed. Okay. Second, financial counseling with a certified advisor. Someone to help you and Gary create a realistic budget, manage debts, rebuild credit. I'll arrange it and cover the first 3 months. Third, you sign a legal agreement drafted by Henry, notarized and binding, that you'll never attempt anything like this again. No more claims on Daniel's estate, no more accusations, no forged documents. You acknowledge in writing that you received fair compensation. I let the weight settle. And fourth, if you violate any part of this agreement, I immediately file criminal charges. Not just forgery and fraud, but elder financial abuse. Every bank statement, every text message goes to the district attorney. No second chances, Margaret. One violation and you're facing 5 to 10 years in prison. Silence stretched between us. Margaret stared at her hands, at the mascara stains on her palms. Why? She whispered. I don't deserve your help. No, you don't. I agreed. But Gary deserves a wife who's emotionally healthy, and you deserve one chance to become better than you've been. Just one. Fresh tears streamed down Margaret's face. What about the money I took from Mom and Dad? That's the hardest part, I said quietly. Legally, it belongs to their estate to me now. Morally, you stole from vulnerable people who trusted you, but practically, you don't have it to return. I took a breath. So you acknowledge the theft in the legal agreement. It's documented. If you violate our terms, that confession becomes part of the criminal case. But if you hold up your end therapy, counseling, public confession, changed behavior, I won't pursue restitution or charges for that either. That's more mercy than I deserve. It's accountability with a path forward. I corrected. Mercy would be pretending this never happened. This is justice with an option for redemption. Which one you get depends on your choices. Margaret nodded slowly. What about the family meeting? Within 1 week, you'll gather everyone who needs to hear this, me, Gary, Henry as witness, and anyone else you told the lie to. You'll explain what you did, forged the document, lied about Daniel's promises, tried to claim half my house. You'll apologize. You'll read a prepared statement Henry and I approved beforehand. Linda was at the party, Margaret said quietly. She heard me accuse you in front of everyone. Then Linda needs to be at the confession. She helped you plot this. She needs to hear you take responsibility. Margaret flinched but nodded. And after, then you start therapy. You start counseling. You rebuild your life the right way with honesty, with help with boundaries. And you stay away from me unless I reach out first. I'm not ready for regular sisterly contact. Maybe someday, but not now. You've burned that bridge. Whether you can rebuild it depends on years of changed behavior, not weeks. I understand. Her voice barely audible. I really am sorry, Claire, for all of it. For the years of jealousy, for not being the sister you deserved. Show me through your actions, I said. Words are easy, change is hard. We met with Henry the following afternoon to formalize the arrangement. Marcus joined us as witness his investigator's presence, a reminder of how much evidence existed if Margaret violated the terms. Margaret signed the legal agreement with trembling hands, her eyes still puffy. The document was thorough, full public confession at a family gathering within 1 week, mandatory therapy and financial counseling, with verification. Structured debt assistance. Claire would facilitate, not fund entirely, but make manageable. Any violation would trigger immediate criminal prosecution. Henry witnessed the signature, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes kind. Mrs. Thornton, I want to be clear that Mrs. Mitchell is offering you a substantial opportunity here. What she's proposing is far more generous than most people would be after what you attempted. I know, Margaret whispered. The terms are firm, but fair. You have a genuine chance to make this right. I suggest you take it seriously. I will. When Margaret left Henry's office, she turned back to look at me. I really am sorry, Claire, for everything. For the years of jealousy, for not being the sister you deserved. I nodded, not quite ready for forgiveness, but willing to see where this path led. Show me through your actions, Margaret. Words are easy. Change is hard. She left, and I stood in Henry's office with tangled emotions, exhausted, sad, but also something like peace. Justice didn't have to be destruction. Sometimes it could be accountability with a path toward redemption. You handled this well, Henry said quietly. Daniel would be proud. I hope so. I gathered my things. Now comes the hardest part, telling the rest of the family. The following Saturday, I invited extended family to my home for what I called an important family discussion. Now comes the hardest part, telling the rest of the family. By 6 o'clock, my dining room held a confused gathering. Aunt Judith and Uncle Robert, my father's younger sister and her husband, both in their 70s and bewildered by the formal summons. Rachel Davis, my closest friend who'd witnessed Margaret's accusation at my birthday party. 2 other family friends who'd been there that night. And Margaret and Gary, who arrived last, Margaret's face pale, and Gary refusing to meet anyone's eyes. What's this about Claire? Aunt Judith asked as people settled into chairs. Your message said it was urgent. I stood at the head of the table, the digital recorder visible beside me. Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual, but something happened that requires public acknowledgement. I'm recording this for legal documentation purposes everyone here is aware of and consents to that recording. Confused nods around the table. Margaret has something she needs to say, something she needs to confess about claims she made regarding Daniel's estate. I turned to my sister. Margaret stood on shaking legs, a printed statement trembling in her hands. Gary reached for her arm, but she pulled away, stepping forward alone. I lied. She began, her voice barely audible. She cleared her throat, tried again. At Claire's birthday party, I lied. I claimed Daniel promised me $325,000 for caring for our parents. I said he'd drawn up an agreement that Claire was refusing to honor it. Aunt Judith gasped. Uncle Robert's face darkened. None of that was true. Margaret's voice cracked. Daniel never promised me additional compensation beyond what he already gave me, and he gave me a lot, $90,000 over 5 years. Monthly payments, medical equipment, professional caregivers. He was generous and grateful for my sacrifice. She looked down at the paper, tears dropping onto the text. I forged a document. I created a fake caretaker agreement with Daniel's signature copied from other papers. I did this because Gary and I were drowning in debt facing eviction, and I was desperate. I thought Claire had everything and I had nothing, and it seemed justified somehow. Margaret! Aunt Judith's voice held horror. But it gets worse. Margaret's whole body shook now. While I was caring for Mom and Dad, I had power of attorney over their finances. I was supposed to use their money for their care. Instead, I took $95,000 from their account to pay my personal debts. I stole from our dying parents when they trusted me to protect them. The silence that followed was crushing. Uncle Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. You stole from Robert and Evelyn while they were sick. Yes. Margaret's voice broke completely. I betrayed my family at their most vulnerable moment. I betrayed Claire when she was grieving. I lied about Daniel when he couldn't defend himself. I did all of this out of desperation and resentment, and I am so sorry." She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. Gary finally moved his arm around her shoulders, his own face red with shame. Rachel spoke first, her voice tight. "Claire, I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" "No one knew," I said quietly. "Margaret was very convincing. But now you all know the truth." "Are you pressing charges?" Uncle Robert demanded. "Because what she did, elder financial abuse forgery, that's serious prison time. I've made a different choice." I explained the agreement, Margaret's mandatory therapy and financial counseling, the structured debt assistance I'd provide, the legal contract binding her to changed behavior. If she violates any term, criminal charges will be filed immediately. But if she holds up her end, she gets a chance to rebuild her life the right way. The reactions were immediate and divided. "You're too kind, Claire," Aunt Judith said, shaking her head. "After what she did to you, to her own parents." "I think it's brave," Rachel interrupted. "Justice doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it means accountability with a path forward." One of the family friends, an older woman who'd known my mother, frowned. Family should forgive. That's what Evelyn would have wanted, keeping the family together. "Forgiveness doesn't mean no consequences," I said firmly. "I love Margaret enough to require her to be better. Enabling her destructive behavior isn't love, it's cowardice, disguised as family loyalty." The woman recoiled as if slapped. She gathered her purse. "I don't think I need to be here for this." She left the door, closing heavily behind her. Two others followed, clearly uncomfortable with the public airing of family dysfunction. Aunt Judith watched them go, her lips pressed thin. "This should have been handled privately, Claire. Making Margaret confess in front of everyone like this, it's humiliating." "It's accountability," I corrected. "Margaret lied publicly at my birthday party. She humiliated me publicly. She gets to take responsibility publicly. That's how this works. Your mother would have handled this differently." I met her eyes steadily. "My mother enabled Margaret's worst behaviors for 30 years. She made excuses covered for her, let her avoid consequences. Look where that led. I love Margaret enough to demand she live up to better standards." Aunt Judith had no response to that. Uncle Robert, who'd been silent, finally spoke. "What Margaret did was wrong, deeply criminally wrong. But Claire's offering her a way forward. That takes strength." He looked at Margaret, who was still crying in Gary's arms. "You'd better take this seriously, girl. Your sister's giving you something you don't deserve. Don't waste it." Margaret nodded, unable to speak. As guests left, reactions remained mixed. Rachel hugged me tight, whispering that Daniel would be proud. Uncle Robert shook my hand firmly, respect in his aged eyes. But others departed in silence, clearly troubled by confronting the family's dysfunction so directly. Aunt Judith pulled me aside by the door. "Your mother would have wanted you to handle this privately," she said, a reproachful edge in her voice. I looked straight into her eyes. "My mother enabled Margaret's bad behavior for 30 years. Look where that led. I love Margaret enough to require her to be better." After everyone left, Rachel helped me clean up. She squeezed my hand as we loaded the dishwasher. "You did the right thing. The hard thing and the right thing aren't always the same, but today they were." I nodded, feeling the weight of the past weeks pressing on my shoulders. The confrontation was over. Justice had been served. But healing, real healing for both Margaret and me, would take much longer. The question was whether Margaret would actually do the work or if this was just another performance. 6 months after Margaret's confession, autumn came to Savannah with cooler breezes and golden light filtering through the oak canopies. Will Margaret actually change? I woke that September morning on Daniel's side of the bed, a milestone I'd reached 3 weeks earlier without crying. His closet held only my clothes, now his wardrobe donated, except for his favorite flannel shirt which hung in the back where I could see it. I'd learned that healing wasn't about erasing Daniel, but about making space for both his memory and my continued life. The photograph on my nightstand, our wedding day, Daniel's hand on my waist, both of us laughing at something his best man had said, no longer made me weep. Mostly. Some mornings I still pressed my fingers to his face in the glass, whispering good morning the way I had when he was alive. My interior design business had slowly returned to life. Clients who'd gone silent during my grief began calling again, tentatively at first, then with genuine projects. Last week, I'd landed a contract to restore a historic home on Jones Street, a Victorian, that needed careful, respectful renovation. The work gave me purpose beyond simply getting through days. Every Tuesday evening, I attended grief support group at a church on Bull Street. 8 strangers who'd become friends, all navigating the impossible terrain of loss. Patricia Owens, a widow of 5 years who facilitated our meetings, often said, "Grief has no deadline. Some days you'll feel whole again. Others you'll feel like you're drowning. Both are normal." I'd reached the stage where I could help newer members, the ones still raw, still unable to imagine a future without their person. I remembered being there 6 months ago, unable to see past the next hour. Now I could offer them hope that survival was possible, even if healing remained a work in progress. Margaret's name came up occasionally through family channels. Aunt Judith, who'd softened slightly since the confession, mentioned that Margaret was attending therapy consistently every week for 6 months, no missed appointments. Her financial counselor had helped restructure her debts into manageable payments. She'd found steady work as an office manager at a dental clinic, nothing glamorous, but reliable income. Gary had found work too, apparently in construction. They were paying down debt gradually, no longer facing eviction. Margaret sent occasional text messages, brief, respectful updates that I usually answered with equally brief acknowledgments. We weren't close. We might never be close again. And I was learning that was okay. "Do I need to feel guilty that we're not close?" I asked Dr. Warner during a therapy session that month. She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Not every relationship heals Claire. Some transform into something different. You can wish Margaret well from a distance. That's completely valid. It feels like I should want more, like I should want sisterhood back." Should, according to whom? Family members who enabled her behavior for years, or according to your own emotional truth? Dr. Warner leaned forward. "You offered Margaret accountability and a path forward. She's taking it, which is admirable. But you're not obligated to provide deep sisterly intimacy after what she did. Polite, distant family connection is enough." The permission to let go of guilt around that was profound. I didn't have to force a relationship that no longer fit. I could be glad Margaret was improving while maintaining protective distance. That Saturday, I worked in the garden Daniel and I had planned but never planted. I'd found bulbs in the garage, daffodils, tulips, hyacinths purchased 2 springs ago when he'd been alive, and we'd talked about adding color to the yard. They'd sat forgotten until now. Kneeling in the rich Georgia soil, I pressed each bulb into the earth, imagining spring blooms. It felt symbolic, planting hope for a future while honoring the past. Daniel had bought these, had envisioned them brightening our home. Now I was completing that vision, continuing our shared life, even though he couldn't be here to see it. "I think I'm ready," I said aloud to Daniel, or to his memory, or perhaps just to the universe. Ready to live again, not just survive. You'd be proud of how I handled Margaret. You'd probably say I was too easy on her. I smiled, hearing his voice in my head. "That's because you have a better heart than I do." A breeze rustled through the oak leaves above, and I chose to believe it was him saying he approved. Working in the garden, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 18 months' anticipation. Not just for tomorrow or next week, but for seasons ahead. For spring, when these bulbs would bloom. For next year, when my business might fully recover. For a future where Daniel's absence was still painful but no longer consuming. I was learning to carry grief differently, not as an anchor drowning me, but as a weight I could bear while still moving forward. Some days were harder than others. Last week I'd found Daniel's reading glasses behind the couch and sobbed for an hour. But today I could plant flowers and feel something like peace. Rachel called that evening as I was cleaning soil from under my fingernails. "There's a lecture series at SCAD next week, Ethics in Modern Society. My friend teaches it. He's brilliant. Want to go? Might be interesting." I almost said no. My instinct was still to decline invitations to stay home, where memories felt safer than new experiences. But something made me pause. Maybe it was time to say yes to things again. Maybe it was time to meet new people, have new experiences. Not to replace Daniel, no one could do that, but to let life back in. Sure, I heard myself say. Why not? Really? Rachel sounded surprised. That's great. I think you'll really like Dr. Harrison. He makes philosophy actually relevant to real life. After we hung up, I returned to the garden one last time, checking the newly planted bulbs. In 6 months, they'd bloomed daffodils bright against spring green tulips in colors Daniel had chosen. Growth happening invisibly underground, waiting for the right season to emerge. I was like those bulbs, I realized, healing beneath the surface, preparing for a season when I could bloom again. Not the same as before, grief had changed me permanently, but still capable of beauty, of growth, of continuing. That night, I slept through without waking Daniel's flannel shirt folded on his pillow beside me. I didn't know that the professor teaching Rachel's lecture series would become someone important. I was just a widow learning to live again one small step at a time. But sometimes small steps lead to unexpected destinations. 1 year after Daniel's death, I stood in the garden on a March morning watching the daffodils bloom. The bulbs Daniel had purchased 2 springs ago, the ones I'd planted last September with tears on my cheeks, had pushed through exactly as promised. Bright yellow against fresh green life, continuing beauty returning. I drove to Bonaventure Cemetery that afternoon, Daniel's favorite coffee in a travel mug I couldn't drink. His headstone, simple granite, reading, "Beloved husband, protector, friend," gleamed in the dappled light filtering through Spanish moss. "Hey, you," I said, settling onto the grass. "It's been a year. I promised I'd keep living fully. Thought you'd want an update." I told him about the business, 3 major restoration projects my reputation rebuilt, about the grief support group where I now helped facilitate, about Margaret. She actually did it. Full year of therapy, consistent work debt payments, on track. We're not close, maybe never will be, but she's trying. We're polite at family gatherings, civil, distant but respectful. I traced his name on the stone. And I've learned that's enough. Not every relationship heals back to what it was. The wind rustled through the oaks, and I heard approval in it. I did something else. I established a fund in your name, the Daniel Mitchell Elder Care Legal Fund. Free legal support for families facing elder financial abuse, resources for caregivers before desperation leads to bad choices. We helped our first 3 families last month. Your legacy is still protecting people, turning tragedy into purpose. His preparation extending beyond death to benefit strangers. There's something else, I said quietly. Someone else. His name is Ethan. I'd met Ethan Cross 6 months earlier at that SCAD lecture Rachel had invited me to, the one I'd almost declined. He taught ethics and philosophy, a professor with kind eyes and patience for a widow who sometimes cried during class discussions. We'd started with coffee, progressed to long conversations about grief, and meaning slowly evolved into something more. He's different from you, quieter, more academic, but he's good, Daniel. He understands you'll always be part of my life. He doesn't try to replace you, he just walks beside me while I carry your memory forward. Love didn't have to be replacement. It could be the heart's capacity to hold both grief and new joy. When I returned home, Ethan was waiting on my porch with coffee. We sat on the garden bench Daniel had built, surrounded by blooming daffodils, comfortable silence between us. "Do you think Daniel would approve of me?" Ethan asked. I considered honestly. "He'd like that you make me laugh again, that you're patient with my grief, that you let me talk about him without jealousy." "He loved you well," Ethan said softly. "That's clear in everything you tell me." He did. And he prepared me even for losing him. I looked at the daffodils at the home I'd fought to keep. His last gift was protection and permission to keep living. The vasectomy records the real will, the journal, the letter he was building armor for a battle he knew was coming. That's extraordinary love. It was. It is. I squeezed his hand. Love doesn't end with death. It transforms. I thought about the year behind me, from shattered widow to woman reclaiming herself. The lessons had been brutal. Boundaries are love, not cruelty. Family isn't an excuse for abuse. Grief and joy can coexist. Preparation is profound care. Compassion doesn't require becoming a doormat. Margaret had tried to take my house, my security, Daniel's reputation. but she couldn't take what we'd built together, the foundation of love, trust, and partnership that transcended death. "Where'd you go?" Ethan asked, watching my expression. I smiled. "Just thinking about how far I've come. A year ago, I didn't think I'd survive this. Now..." I looked around at the garden Daniel had envisioned, at the home I'd protected, at the kind man beside me, at the life I was rebuilding. Now I'm not just surviving, I'm living. Through the window, I could see the lighthouse painting from the estate sale, Daniel's gift to himself, the storm-tossed beacon standing firm. It hung where I saw it daily, a reminder that even battered by waves, some things endure. Past and present coexisting. Memory and possibility sharing space. "Daniel would be proud of you," Ethan said quietly. I nodded, feeling the truth settle like warmth in my chest. Yes, he would. And that makes all the difference. The daffodils swayed in the spring breeze, bright and resilient. Like me, they'd survived dark months underground, transformed by grief, but still capable of blooming. The garden Daniel and I had planned flourished, now tended by my hands, witnessed by someone new, proof that love's work continues even when the person who started it is gone. I'd kept my promise. I was living fully honoring Daniel's memory while claiming my future, carrying grief without being crushed, choosing boundaries without hardening my heart. Margaret was changing, slowly rebuilding with the structure I'd provided. Our relationship would never be what it was, but it had transformed into something sustainable. Some damage runs too deep for full restoration. Accepting that was its own healing. As evening approached, Ethan and I sat in peaceful silence, my head on his shoulder, Daniel's memory a gentle presence rather than devastating absence. The daffodils glowed golden in fading light. Love hadn't ended when Daniel died. It had changed shape, becoming memory and legacy and foundation for whatever came next. His preparation had saved me. His letter had freed me. His love had strengthened me enough to face betrayal with grace and choose compassion without sacrificing myself. "Thank you," I whispered to Daniel, to Ethan, to the universe, to myself for surviving. 1 year after the worst day of my life, I sat in a garden full of flowers my husband had chosen, holding hands with a man who honored that love. Having protected my home and boundaries and dignity from someone who'd tried to destroy all three, I was not just surviving, I was living. And Daniel, wherever he was, would be proud. And to you listening to this story, remember this: God gave Daniel the wisdom to prepare. God gave me the strength to stand firm, and God gave Margaret the chance to change. Not every story needs a villain, sometimes it just needs boundaries. Looking back at my own journey through family betrayal, I see now that the worst kind of family revenge isn't what you do to hurt someone back. It's what you allow them to keep doing to you. Don't be like I almost was, silent, accommodating, letting family loyalty become an excuse for abuse. Family betrayal cuts deepest because it comes from those we're taught to trust unconditionally. But here's what I learned: unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional access. If someone in your family is trying to take advantage of your grief, your kindness, or your resources, whether through family revenge schemes or quiet family betrayal, you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to demand proof. You are allowed to protect yourself even from blood relatives. Forgiveness doesn't require you to be destroyed in the process. Daniel prepared everything because he loved me enough to protect me even after death. That's real love, not the kind that demands you sacrifice yourself on the altar of keeping the family together. Real family doesn't require your destruction to prove your loyalty. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment, sharing your thoughts. Have you ever faced family betrayal or family revenge? How did you handle it? Subscribe to this channel for more stories about resilience, boundaries, and choosing yourself without apology. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to protect themselves, even from family. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Your time and attention mean everything. And a word of caution: the stories you'll hear on this channel contain fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, please feel free to explore other videos that better suit your preferences. We respect your choices.